We are living through not just a viral pandemic, but a pandemic of coercion and compliance. Today I'm going to do a quick review of Dr. Julie Ponesse's book, My Choice, The Ethical Case Against COVID-19 Vaccine Mandates. Dr. Ponesse was a professor of ethics at the University of Western until she was forced to leave due to the vaccine mandates. I've met her in person. She's quite an impressive woman who comes from a very strong academic background. And her book contains a lot of research. It's a very easy read. I highly recommend anyone get it who is like-minded, and maybe even for those, maybe even especially for those who need a bit of convincing as to why the way this pandemic has been handled has been completely unethical. Just a quote from the book. She's got it divided into several chapters. There are so many good quotes, but I don't want to take too long. I like to try to keep the videos short so that you watch them all. And I'll just pick the ones that really, for me, were exemplary of how a lot of us think, very few of us are able to put voice to. On page 12, she says, if you're on the so-called side of science and the experts, you are not only on the right side intellectually, but you're virtuous. You're not only on the right side intellectually and virtuous, you're morally good, you're a good citizen, you're a good democratic participant. And if you're not on the side of the scientists and the experts, whoever has decided what that means, then not only are you wrong, but you're shut down and excluded, and your voice no longer matters. Page 21, I think COVID-19 and my public comments about it have been in many ways a test of the strength of existing relationships. Some relationships or people didn't pass the test. The recent situation has shown who they really were, or maybe who I really was. I find that one to be particularly relevant to my own life. The people I thought that I knew, I found out I really didn't. And perhaps it was me in as well who underwent a change that I didn't realize was in me. She says on page 26, I'm devastated that we've gotten to the place in Canada where you can be dismissed so easily, cast aside so easily for challenging, for questioning. We've seen lots of that. On page 31, I feel the loss of the community and I feel betrayal from people within the community. And she talks later in her book about the good Germans of Nazi Germany and how a generation or two was able to transform your friends and your neighbors from a community into a situation the way we are experiencing it now, where the people you thought you knew really turned against you without a single bat of an eyelash because it was the right thing to do according to the mob mentality, which everyone here in Canada in particular has been swept up with. In her chapter on entitled, Is the Pandemic Response Ethical?, she talks about the measures used that are not supported by data, and that knowing that COVID poses different risks to different people, the fact that we're ignoring that and ignoring effective treatment options has tried to portray this pandemic as something that has only one alternative, and that's the vaccine. And that narrative continues to be held, even though there's data emerging that blatantly undermines that theory. A little further along in the book, she says, as she breaks it down into sections where she poses questions that she answers quite interestingly, the risk-benefit profile. She says, when vaccination, page 44, benefits are high because the vaccine effectively prevents infection and transmission of a disease with a significant infectious fatality rate, or IFR, and there are no known effective treatments, and the health risks from vaccination are low, mandating vaccination may be justified. That is not the case with COVID-19 vaccines. Then she talks about disproportionate harm and quotes a study from Pfizer itself. Their own 6-month trial results show that their COVID vaccine is causing a 300% increase in adverse events, a 75% increase in severe adverse events, and a 43% increase in deaths. That's pretty significant numbers there. We're not allowed to look at that, and scientists or medical experts, doctors, virologists who are skeptics are not allowed to voice their opinions. Discussing risk assessment, she says, applying a rule, page 46, that forces all of us to behave in the same way, assuming the same level of risk, is a further affront to personal autonomy, is ethically unjustified, and is likely to generate much reasonable resistance, which we've seen indeed in many ways over the last 2 years. Risk and experimentation. She says recipients of COVID-19 vaccines are participants in an ongoing research trial because the vaccines have been out for such a short time that they're essentially in what's called a phase 3 clinical trial phase. That's another little piece of information that gets swept under the carpet. And then she compares it to the Nuremberg Code, which was a code that was established after World War II atrocities in Hitler's Germany. And the subject of any kind of experimental drug is to be told about even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. And this is, in fact, not happening with this vaccine. We're just being told you don't get the jab, you lose your job. You don't get the jab, you can't get on an airplane, and so on and so forth. Genuine, fully informed consent is not possible for COVID-19 vaccines. This is page 49. Can it ever be ethical, she asks, to mandate that to which a person cannot, in principle, consent? Obviously, the answer to that is no. We know that the manufacturers of these vaccines are not liable. Therefore, we're prioritizing profit over safety. As for the case against science, she quotes a Dr. Richard Horton, editor-in-chief of The Lancet, on page 53, where he talks about the studies have small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance. Science has taken a turn towards darkness. Her next chapter, A Way Forward, is offering ideas as to what we can do, given that two years of our lives, a little more now, have gone by, which we'll never get back. And rather than just complain about it, she's got some practical suggestions. One, we need to lose our fear, this is page 60, of asking questions, of noting when statements are inconsistent or don't agree with common sense. We need to become committed skeptics when it comes to some key concepts. We must be more skeptical of our concepts of experts. We must become more skeptical of academia, more skeptical of media, more skeptical of government. So all of the policies to date have been sheathed, she says, on page 61, in the armor of collective good. And this leads her to conclude that above all, we must become more skeptical of consensus, or the wisdom of the masses. Getting towards the end of the book, she says on page 73, it's clear that when we question the narrative, and therefore its defenders, we're doing much more than just questioning. We seem to be threatening the very foundations of who we are as a people. And in the eyes of the defenders, that can't be tolerated. Justin Trudeau being a perfect example of that. We those of us who do have questions or are hesitant to take the vaccine get labeled anti-vaxxers, and he himself said those people, meaning people refusing to be vaccinated, are taking up space and should not be tolerated. There's, on page 74, a little known law called Godwin's Law, which is really, the longer an argument runs on, the greater the chance someone or something will be compared to Hitler. So she's resisted making these comparisons, but in actual fact, there are a lot of similarities to the way the masses react to orders from experts, in air quotes. Page 75, the trial of Adolf Eichmann, for example, was his defense was, I was just following orders, which exemplifies more than anything that evil can be the product of simply not thinking about one's actions. And that has indeed been in evidence over the last 2+ years and continues to thrive, particularly here in Canada, where everybody seems to be caught under this mass psychosis that revolves around, their whole lives revolve around COVID and precautions against getting COVID and the fear of COVID. In conclusion, page 82, she says, the science I look at shows clearly that we would have been out of this thing in 2020 if we had just circled the health wagons around the most vulnerable in our population and let life go on far closer to normal for the rest of us. And there's no way to counter that argument, and yet the vaccine, I coined this term from another person who is a commenter on the Toronto Sun Daily newspaper that I read every morning. The rabid vaxxers must continue to justify that their failed vaccines are in fact a reason why, when they all go on to catch COVID, that they didn't get any sicker. And so you look at these people in disbelief, and it truly becomes a situation where it is not seeing the forest for the trees, not recognizing that despite what we're being told, the emperor has no clothes. I really do hope you will consider looking up Julie's book. Dr. Ponesse is saying what a lot of us think and feel, and she's got the voice which many of us wish that we could also have.